racing in you, man. Oh, thank you.
An extract from City Messengers on Radio 4, a documentary which revealed the peculiar fact that cycle couriers choose a leisure pursuit which almost exactly replicates their normal daily work. It's a paradox which in many ways informs a new ethnographic study of dispatch couriers by Ben Fincham, who's lecturer in social science at the University of Brighton, from where he now joins me on the line. And also with me here in the studio, I have Richard Reeves, the new director of the think tank Demos and the author of Happy Mondays, Putting the Pleasure Back into Work. Let me come to you first of all, Ben, because I want to ask you a little bit about these cycle couriers, a sort of little profile of them. Can you tell me about their age, their educational background, and how long they spend in the job, those sorts of things?
Yeah, certainly. The couriers that I met during the course of my study, they came from all walks of life. But broadly speaking, 1 in 6 were women. A third were educated to degree level or above, which for what's essentially a manual labour job is very, very high. They had an average age of about 27 or 28. And also, interestingly, for the purposes of what we're about to talk about, not many of them had kind of conventional work biographies before becoming bike messengers themselves.
Let's talk about exactly what they do. I mean, they're collecting parcels from one part of the city and just taking them to another. That's it, pretty straightforwardly.
Well, yeah, that's in its crudest terms. That's it. But yeah. So what will
spell it out for me a bit more?
What will happen is that there'll be a set of riders who'll be controlled from a central position via radio or increasingly pager, and they will be instructed to go and pick up parcels from one place, drop to another. The way of making money is to pick up multiple parcels and then drop on a route that the messenger decides themselves. So I mean, there's quite a lot of kind of geographic negotiation, and also
they're not on sat nav. I mean, they're working this out for themselves.
Yeah, a kind of internal sat nav, I suppose. But
this is dangerous work.
It is dangerous work, yeah. In terms of fatalities, thankfully, very few people get killed. But in terms of levels of accident and injury, they're very, very high. I mean, my estimation was it was higher than any other profession that was described in the Health and Safety Executive.
So they stay about an average of about 3 years, I think, in the job. And what percentage get hospitalised during that period, get injured during that period?
Well, well over half reported to me that they'd received injuries that required some form of medical intervention.
It does seem extraordinary, this. You wonder why they take the work. When you said that these people are educated people, largely educated people, relatively educated people, it's low paid, yeah? I mean, what are the average wages?
Well, at the time in which I completed the study, which was a couple of years ago now, the average wage was between sort of £50 and £70 a day.
And half of them are going to end up injured, even hospitalised. Yeah. I mean, what exactly is the appeal?
Well, I mean, I think the appeal is the cultural affectation or subcultural affectation that the profession offers. So rather than being just a way of earning money, it's much more of a way of life, an ethic, a kind of way of being, I suppose.
In way of being, tell me more about that. What is it they relish? They have a sense of freedom, some existential notion that they're free spirits?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously I'm not talking about all bicycle messengers. Some didn't feel this, but a great many felt that they had a real subcultural attachment to that free spirit. The danger element was one that came through very strongly in the study, but also a kind of, I don't know if it's old-fashioned, but comradeliness.
And did they feel, because they almost knew they were only going to be in work for a certain amount of time, they weren't going to be there for their life. Did this add to the spirit of freedom?
Well, actually, the 3 years figure that I came up with was where I asked people who were actually working. So many would work beyond 3 years. So that was the average for the people that I surveyed. But I don't know, actually. I think that the feeling of kind of freedom, but also that subcultural attachment, was one that resonates much further into people's lives than the actual time that they're doing the job.
Because these people did have a pretty unconventional history of work, didn't they? They'd not had what we described as a normal career path, either before or after being couriers.
Well, that's right. I don't know about after, but before, almost all the messengers had several jobs. It wasn't as though that somebody had got very bored with working in a bank or something, and then became a messenger. Most had a kind of patchwork of employment history.
I'm going to turn to Richard Reeves in a moment and ask him about some of the implications of this for work and leisure, but I just want to ask you first, Ben, about this, because we heard that extract from the people racing around, and this indeed is a feature, isn't it, of these cycle couriers, that when they are free from work, when they take time off work, they spend their leisure time organising what could be seen as very similar to the work they do during the day, namely organising races, cycling races across towns. Tell me about some of those events they organise.
Yeah, the events, again, aren't participated in by all messengers, but for those that do participate, they're actually a very important way, I felt, of galvanising an identity. But also, as you say, it kind of lifts the work from being simply a set of tasks into being a kind of lifestyle. So they would organise things called alley cat races, where people would be given a kind of a replication of a route where you picked up and dropped off around a city, and then people would race against each other to see who could complete the route first. There are European and world championships where the same sorts of things happen. There's a replication of the conditions of work outside of work.
Let me then turn to Richard, who's written a great deal about work. First of all, before we talk about this work-life balance, I can remember reading in your book, Happy Mondays, you were saying, why is it that people don't enjoy their work a bit more? It was almost, perhaps I'm putting words into your mouth, but you almost seem to suggest that the British almost started from the position that work was something which was rather nasty, something which had to be done, rather like shoveling away at a heap of rot for day after day, and then eventually you had this wonderful thing called leisure. Yeah. These people don't seem to fit that, do they?
They don't, and I think there are other people that don't either. I think it's a lovely piece of work from that point of view, because it challenges that presumption that actually work's the price you pay for the rest of your life. But actually here you've got a group of people who, guess what they like doing? They like cycling quickly around towns quite dangerously, and they make their living from doing that, and then they do it even when they're not being paid to do it. And that's a kind of group, a sort of tribal group of people who challenge the economic view of work, which is that it's just a disutility, this thing you don't like. And by the way, even if you do like it in this country, you should never, of course, admit to it. That's the key thing. You never go down the pub and say, oh, I love my job, I had a lovely day today. That's just socially unacceptable. I do quite like that Ben's made the point about they're not bankers, and I'm intrigued by the possibility of having the earlier conversation that actually might see a few bankers cycling around now. But I think that the really nice thing about the study is that it does challenge this notion of work as a bad thing, life as a good thing, and that you can separate the two things out. Here are people who for whatever reason, get real joy out of their work and wouldn't recognise the divide.
So are you saying that there is something very special about this group which sets them apart, the nature of the camaraderie, the sort of the danger about it, which helps to make leisure and work blur together because their identity is so much taken up with their work? I mean, are you saying that in a way this example raises questions about the relationship between work and life for the rest of us, that the rest of us don't have such neat compartmentalisation when you examine it closely?
Well, I think that's the big question, is how far is this generalisable to other groups? All right, you can easily think of other groups, and very often actually a sense of danger or something slightly unpleasant about the job very often does actually give this sense of what Ben calls comradeliness. So people who work on oil rigs, for example, roughnecks. One of my favourite examples from the literature is that sewer workers have very high levels of job satisfaction, and that's partly because there's a sort of sense of camaraderie, and I'm told, I've never actually tested this, that you're not really a sewer worker until you've fallen in the sewer. So that's the rite of passage. So these things, these sort of tribes, these ethnographies do create a sense of identity and togetherness that means inevitably they're your mates. Maybe it partly defines who you are, and that will actually blur the line and make life better.
It's not necessarily anything to do with the intrinsic enjoyment of the job, because you wouldn't have thought that sewer work was intrinsically enjoyable, but it is just that the camaraderie which is developed in doing something that is regarded as dirty and dangerous means that those people stay together after work.
I think there are two things going on here. One is the possibility that people would actually genuinely love what they're doing, and there a better analogy might be, so, for example, people who work for a charity or in advertising or even the media, I don't know, possibly the media, who actually genuinely love what they're doing, and it's such a part of their identity that's what blurs the line. And the other, which is that, so there's a kind of love of it, and the other is that something about the nature of it actually brings you together, and that could be danger or unpleasantness or whatever, which is in a sense a kind of different way of bringing this kind of group of people together. But either way, it does actually, I think, throw open the question that actually the line between work and life is less firm than we thought, and that might be becoming more true of more people in the economy.
Interesting, when I was talking to someone about this today, and they said, oh, their classic thing. I mean, these fits the example, really, of people who like their work, I suppose, but they said they've never known anyone who fitted this complete failure to separate work and life so much as sports writers and sports broadcasters. As soon as they'd finished the day talking about the chances of England against Belarus tonight, immediately went to the pub and started talking about the prospects for England against Belarus tonight. But anyway, but let me come back to you. But what about you? I mean, how do you take this business of? Do you feel these people don't then have a private life? There isn't any time that they go home and shut the door and settle down?
Yeah, I mean, of course, many of these people will involve themselves in the kind of the affect to a greater or lesser extent. But I mean, I wrote the article really to highlight I see it as kind of pointlessness of making a dichotomous statement about work and life. I mean, the interconnectedness between identity, culture and relationships, which happen across all employment sectors, are too complex to be captured in these sorts of kind of models. And if we start, kind of formulating policy or acting on these sorts of models, then we're never really going to understand why people are happy or unhappy at work.
So you'd be happier if governmental bodies didn't talk constantly about work-life balance?
I can't see the point.
Go on. Well, you can't see the point because you don't think that these are discrete, separate areas of most people's lives.
Exactly right. I don't think they're discrete and separate. And actually, in a study that I'm doing at the moment on mental health and work with Carl Walker at Brighton, we're finding exactly that when you ask people about their happiness or unhappiness at work, they're dictated by an awful lot of peripheral factors which are in work and out of work. They're not separate. They're kind of it's all life.
I agree with Ben about this, Laurie. And I think not only is it wrong, actually, as a kind of analytical way of thinking about work, but actually it's a regressive idea. It's regressive to assume that actually people will that work is just this thing that they have to do and that they hate, and that it's what pays for everything else. Actually, a much more progressive view of the world is one in which actually people enjoy their work, they're identified by their work, they might well do crazy alley cat, whatever those races were afterward. Well, in a sense, that's all to the good, it seems to me. And the whole idea that actually you shouldn't have friends through work, or that somehow saying to someone, what do you do, is a kind of somehow that's an insulting question, because actually the choice of work, how you choose to expend your energy during your working hours, is a hugely important part of who you are, and so it should be.
But there will be, won't there? Aren't we going a little bit too far here? There will be a lot of people who are listening to this at the moment who have that sensation of walking out of the doors of their workplace, their whatever it is, their conveyor belt or their metaphorical, their similar, and going home and shutting the door, and suddenly they are in a different world.
Of course, and if that's the case, because that's the sort of people they are, then okay. But it seemed to me that it's perfectly possible that they've just ended up doing a job that they actually really can't stand, and if that shouldn't be something that we should live with. Who hairdressers have got incredibly high levels of job satisfaction, they're relatively low paid. I've already mentioned. So actually, it should be an aspiration. I'm not saying that everybody loves their work; that would be crazy. But surely it's a decent aspiration that people should enjoy what they do.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we'll all try much harder to enjoy what we do. Richard Reeves and Ben Fincham in Brighton, thank you very much.